Sky Sports are reporting that Dillian Whyte has signed a contract for the Anthony Joshua fight. Now, we've yet to get confirmation of this from Eddie Hearn, Dillian Whyte himself, or Anthony Joshua, but assuming it's true, I'm not saying it is, but assuming it's true, this fight ticks several boxes for Anthony Joshua, for DAZN, for Eddie Hearn, and I guess for Dillian Whyte too. So, from the perspective of DAZN, they're paying Anthony Joshua a lot of money per fight. If they were to stick him in against an Ajit Kabayel, an Otto Wallin, or whoever else, it's not going to make as much money. They're not going to sell as many tickets. They're not going to drive as many subscriptions or even pay-per-views if they decide to put this on pay-per-view as they would if it's a Dillian Whyte. So that ticks a box for DAZN. It ticks a box for Eddie Hearn because he's dealing with a known quantity in Dillian Whyte for Anthony Joshua. Remember, Dillian Whyte is not, as far as we know, tied down to a long-term contract with Eddie Hearn. But this is a guy who's worked with many, many times in the past, and he's seen Anthony Joshua lay Dillian Whyte out on the canvas. So that gives Eddie Hearn some confidence putting AJ in with Dillian Whyte again. Obviously, AJ did get hurt in that fight, but he managed to come through. And Dillian Whyte has looked even more vulnerable than Anthony Joshua of late. I mean, he's been hurt in literally every fight he's been in going back several years now. Was there any exception? I mean, I'm trying to think. Yeah, the Alexander Povetkin rematch. He didn't get hurt in that fight. But apart from that, he's been hurt in every fight he's been in going back several years. So then we come to Anthony Joshua. It ticks boxes for him. Why? Because Anthony Joshua is at a point in his career where he lacks confidence. He's lost 3 times, and he really hasn't gotten over the beating he took at the hands of Andy Ruiz. And the confidence he lost from that was compounded by back-to-back losses to Alexander Usyk. And remember, all 3 of those losses were decisive. It's not like there was some controversy there. No, he was soundly beaten on all 3 occasions that he's lost in a professional boxing ring. And that has clearly taken its toll on his confidence. We saw that, we saw the lack of confidence after the first Ruiz fight. I certainly saw it, but I guess a lot of Anthony Joshua fans didn't want to see it. But I could see it in the Pulev fight, for example. When I did my post-fight review for that, I was saying that Anthony Joshua still looks like a guy who's haunted by what happened to him in New York against Andy Ruiz. But anyway, we saw in the Jermaine Franklin fight that his confidence is perhaps at an all-time low as a professional. And so how do you fix that? Because you can't take a guy like that and stick him in against a Deontay Wilder or a Tyson Fury when his confidence is rock bottom. Everything in boxing is predicated on having enough confidence. You can have all the ability in the world. If you don't have the confidence to use that ability, then it's all for nothing. It's like Audley Harrison. Audley Harrison actually had a lot of ability, and he used to talk confidently, but inwardly he wasn't actually that confident at all. That's why when he got in the ring, man was scared of his own shadow half of the time. And it's the same thing with Anthony Joshua, scared of his own shadow. I mean, not previously in AJ's career, he's done much better than Audley Harrison, obviously. But where he's at this point, going off the Jermaine Franklin fight, man's scared of his own shadow. So how do you get a guy's confidence back up sufficiently that he can actually have a chance against a Deontay Wilder, a Tyson Fury, or whoever else? Well, you just follow what has always been done in boxing. When Mike Tyson lost to Buster Douglas, when Lennox Lewis lost to Oliver McCall, you give them some confidence builders. And these are usually fringe contenders at best, or even journeyman. When Mike Tyson came back after the Douglas loss, they gave him Henry Tillman, a guy who'd been stopped several times, a guy who wasn't particularly serious about boxing at that stage of his career, and a guy that Mike Tyson was familiar with. He fought Henry Tillman in the amateurs. But obviously, Mike Tyson had come on leaps and bounds since they fought in the amateurs many, many years previous. So Tillman was food for Mike Tyson. He didn't have the power to keep him off, was vulnerable in terms of punch resistance, and obviously Mike Tyson did what he does. He went straight through the guy. Next fight, they gave him Alex Stewart, who was a fringe contender, but again, not a top flight heavyweight by any stretch of the imagination. And Mike Tyson went through him as well. And then after that fight, that's when they stepped him back up to world level when he fought Razor Ruddock. So it was only in Mike Tyson's 3rd fight after his loss to Buster Douglas that they gave him something real. Similar situation with Lennox Lewis. In fact, with Lewis, they took a bit more time with him because his confidence was more badly affected than Mike Tyson's confidence when he lost to Buster Douglas. Fighters are not all the same mentally. Some fighters recover more quickly. And so when it comes to matching a fighter who's having this confidence issue, you have to deal with it on an individual basis. You can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. Some fighters are going to get their confidence back very quick, and other fighters it's going to take time, and you have to act accordingly. So with Lennox Lewis, they brought him back against Lionel Butler, who was a journeyman, a guy who was totally out of shape. He was dangerous for about a round, and you can debate whether he was actually dangerous at all. But in the mind of Lennox Lewis, he was somewhat dangerous. And you could see in that fight that Lewis was very gun shy. He wasn't the same Lennox Lewis that we'd seen prior to that loss to Oliver McCall. And Lewis jabbed and jabbed and jabbed, but never really let his hands go in any meaningful way. And Lionel Butler in the end was just so tired that he actually went down more out of fatigue than any concussive effect from Lewis's punches. But that's who they brought Lewis back against. Lionel Butler, little 5'10" guy, weighed about, 250, 60 pounds, something like that. He was very out of shape. Then they matched him against Justin Fortune. Some of you may be familiar with Justin Fortune because of his association with Manny Pacquiao in the latter stages of Pacquiao's career. But Justin Fortune was, I think it's probably generous to call him a fringe contender because he never beat anyone of note. In fact, Justin Fortune's first loss, I think, was to Buster Mathis Jr. And that's even more shocking when you consider the fact that Buster Mathis Jr. was not a puncher and he stopped Justin Fortune, right? So that just puts it in perspective. If you go and have a look at Buster Mathis Jr.'s record, you might find he's got, 20% KO ratio. This is a heavyweight, all right? So this guy could not punch. He stopped Justin Fortune. That's who they put Lennox Lewis in with, Justin Fortune, in Lewis's second comeback fight after losing to McCall. So he was given 2 cream puffs, 2 puddings, Lennox Lewis, because they understood that his confidence wasn't where it needed to be. And the idea of a confidence builder is to take a fighter who feels like prey, because that's what Lennox Lewis felt like, judging by the way he fought against Lionel Butler. He felt like prey. The idea of a confidence builder is to make the fighter feel like a predator again. You see, if you can grasp that concept of fighting, feeling like prey, that's how the fighter feels sometimes after a bad defeat. You want to make them feel like a predator again so they can go and fight other predators. So it was in Lewis's third comeback fight that they gave him Tommy Morrison. Now, you might look at Tommy Morrison and say, that's a similar level to Razor Ruddock because Tommy Morrison actually beat Razor Ruddock. Yeah, but Tommy Morrison didn't beat the same version of Razor Ruddock that Mike Tyson beat. The version that Tommy Morrison beat was diminished somewhat. I'm not saying he wasn't dangerous at all, but he was somewhat diminished compared to the version who fought Mike Tyson. Because obviously Ruddock had those 2 tough fights with Tyson, came back and had a couple of knockout wins. Then he got knocked out by Lennox Lewis. Then he spent some time in the wilderness. And after several years, he fought Tommy Morrison. And I think he was actually winning that fight at the time he got knocked out. But either way, to me, that was Tommy Morrison's last fight, by the way, before he got diagnosed with HIV. The Lennox Lewis fight I'm talking about. So Lewis was then given a diminished Tommy Morrison. That was his next fight on his comeback trail to get his confidence back up. And you could see, certainly in the Morrison fight, Lewis's confidence start to come back. The old swagger he used to have start to come back in the Tommy Morrison fight. And after Morrison, they threw him in, I don't want to say at elite level because Mercer was not elite, but he was very tough. He was a legit top 6, top 7 heavyweight at the time. And Mercer was notorious for having a tremendous chin, being a ferocious inside fighter and having a very good jab. And Mercer wasn't even in the greatest of shape, at least not in terms of his weight. He had a big belly on him in that fight. Mercer's prime weight was around 225, 226. And for the Lewis fight, I think he might have been like 238. So he was at least like 10, 15 pounds overweight, something like that, Ray Mercer. But either way, he was in good cardiovascular shape for the Lennox Lewis fight because he fought hard for 10 rounds and it was a real good heavyweight scrap. If any of you want to see a good underrated heavyweight fight from the 1990s, go and watch Lennox Lewis versus Ray Mercer. That was a good scrap. There was no knockdown, so, there are far more wild heavyweight fights in the 90s and better heavyweight fights in the 90s than Lewis versus Mercer. But it was still a real good scrap. Lots of inside fighting. Both guys landed big shots on the chin, back and forth exchanges. And so that fight right there was the right fight at the right time for Lennox Lewis. They needed to put him in there with someone who was really going to test him because the other guys like Lionel Butler, Tommy Morrison, Justin, they weren't testing Lewis. They were just there to get his confidence back up. And when it was sufficiently up, then they put him in with Mercer and he gained more confidence from that again. I know I'm steering well away from the main subject, which is Dillian Whyte signing a contract for Anthony Joshua, but it's all going to make sense, right? Some of you guys say that you like these long form videos anyway, so there you go. But that's the way you bring a heavyweight back or any fighter back when they're having confidence problems. You do it slowly. You don't take a guy who's scared of his own shadow and throw them straight back in the deep end with a killer. That's ridiculous. You only do that if you think that he's finished and he's not even worth making any effort to rehabilitate, and you just want to cash him out quick. That's when you do that. But if you think that there is actually some mileage left in this guy, then you bring him back the way they brought Lennox Lewis back. You bring him back the way they brought Mike Tyson back, step by step. It's not quite like starting from scratch with a fighter turning pro, but it's like a mini version of that, a condensed version of that. That's how you bring him back. So with Anthony Joshua, if the Dillian Whyte fight happens, Dillian Whyte is obviously dangerous. He's got this big left hook. He's got a massive heart and he's physically strong, but familiarity breeds contempt. When Anthony Joshua fought Jermaine Franklin, he didn't quite know who Jermaine Franklin was as a fighter. Never been in the ring with him. Didn't know what his power was like. Didn't know what his speed and reflexes were like. Didn't know what his chin was like. You can only tell a certain amount from watching him ringside against Dillian Whyte, because Dillian Whyte is not Anthony Joshua. You have to be in there and feel the punches and experience it all for yourself. So AJ wasn't sure what would happen if Jermaine Franklin caught him on the chin. He wasn't sure what would happen in the clinches, who would be, that kind of thing. But with Dillian Whyte, he is sure. He might not necessarily be right, but in his own mind, I have to assume AJ is very sure that he will beat Dillian Whyte if they fight. Why? Because he's done it before. So it ticks the box as a confidence builder for AJ. Because if he, let's say, beats Dillian Whyte in better fashion than Tyson Fury did, then again, in his own mind, he might think, hey, I'm not that far away from reaching the top again, from challenging for a heavyweight title again. If I can dispatch of Dillian better than Tyson Fury did, then I'm nearly there. Now, I'm not saying that it's a like-for-like comparison at this point, because the knockout defeats that Dillian Whyte has suffered, including the defeat to Tyson Fury, diminish him every time. So I'm not saying the version of Dillian Whyte that Anthony Joshua is going to fight is going to be as good as the one who fought Tyson Fury, okay? But from AJ's perspective, in his mind, I would imagine this is what he might think if he dispatches of Dillian Whyte quickly. So, as I say, from the familiarity of Dillian Whyte will help AJ feel more confident going into the fight than he would do against an opponent he's never fought before. And if he dispatches of him better than Fury, that adds more confidence. And he's going to go in there against the guy who's trying to take his head off. And again, if he comes through that, more confidence again. See, if you put him in there with a guy who's trying to take his head off that AJ doesn't know, there's a chance he could go into his shell again, being unsure of himself. But he knows Dillian. And he knows that one clean uppercut and Dillian Whyte is sprawled out on the canvas all over again. AJ knows that. So it ticks that box. And for Dillian Whyte, obviously, he wants a big payday. And he wants another run at the title. And he wants revenge. And this fight ticks those boxes to some extent. It's not as big a payday as he wanted, but it's still bigger than any other payday he's going to get right now. It ticks the box in terms of his desire to get back in title contention, because if he beats Anthony Joshua, he goes up in the rankings and closer to a title shot again. And obviously he has had 2 fights with Anthony Joshua previously, one in the amateurs, one in the pros. They're one apiece. He'd like to end the trilogy by getting another win over Anthony Joshua. And by the way, Dillian Whyte in the amateurs, when he fought Anthony Joshua. In fact, I won't even go into that here. Maybe I'll talk about it on the Patreon. But there's a backstory that some of you might be aware of. I won't get into it here for the sake of keeping this video from not being ridiculously long, right? Don't want to make it ridiculously long. So that's that. Dillian Whyte, according to Sky Sports, has reportedly signed the contract for the rematch with Anthony Joshua. Ticks boxes all round. The only box it doesn't tick, and there are kind of 2. One, for a rehabilitation fight, Dillian Whyte is more dangerous than you'd want. But again, this is an exceptional circumstance because it's somebody that Anthony Joshua's fought and beat before. And the other thing, well, in fact, there are 2 more things. Let me add another one. Dillian Whyte's best punch is the left hook. Now, Teddy Atlas, I saw him do a video recently where he said that Anthony Joshua is most susceptible to a right hand, and that's why he thinks Deontay Wilder knocks Anthony Joshua out. Well, Deontay Wilder might knock Anthony Joshua out, but I've always thought that AJ is most susceptible to a left hook, not a right hand. Yeah, he's been hit with right hands. I mean, Klitschko hit him with a right hand and dropped him. But he also hit him with left hooks in that fight. In that 5th round, Klitschko has landed left hooks on AJ's chin. But more notably than that, against Andy Ruiz, it was the left hook that caught AJ and put him down the first time. Against Dillian Whyte, of course, in the first fight, he got caught with a left hook. Against Povetkin, go and watch that fight. Anthony Joshua gets caught with a left hook come left uppercut in the first round. It's towards the end of the first round. AJ gets caught with a left hook, left uppercut. And then obviously in the first Alexander Usyk fight, he gets hit with a left hand, not a hook, but a left hand from the southpaw position. So most of the punches that have hurt Anthony Joshua and stunned him, put him down, whatever, have been from the left side. They've been left hands. They haven't been right hands. So I think he's more vulnerable on that side. And that tends to be the case with fighters who stand very upright, from what I've observed over the years, as they tend to be more susceptible to punches round the side than they do straight punches. So that's one thing that Dillian Whyte does bring to the table. Punches hard. Anthony Joshua is more susceptible to left hooks, in my opinion, than right hands. And the third downside, if you can call it that, is that Dillian Whyte doesn't have the same dimensions or even similar dimensions to a Deontay Wilder. And so if this is his final preparatory fight for a Deontay Wilder, it doesn't really work in that regard, right? This isn't a guy who's 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", who can move around the ring and come at him with random right hands. That's not Dillian Whyte at all. Totally different style, totally different dimensions. So stylistically, it's not good prep for Wilder. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Video far longer than I wanted it to be, but hopefully some of you guys enjoyed it anyway. Catch you on the next one. Are you sick and tired of the mainstream mindset? Does the dogmatic conformity and pathological ignorance have you tearing your hair out in frustration? Then don't be alone. Come and join our brotherhood on Patreon. We stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. You'll gain access to my weekly topical podcast, where we take more deep dives than Jacques Cousteau on an endless variety of subjects. There's also videos, interviews, live Q&As, as well as a vast back catalogue of previous episodes, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen via the Patreon app or download in high-quality MP3. Connect with myself and hundreds of other members in our Element chat group. There's no contract, no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a Mickey D's McMuffin. Just head to my Patreon page via the link below this video and select the tier called the Brotherhood of Reason. I'll see you over there.